Ethan Cole's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto Catherine's finger. "I don't know your whole story," he whispered, "but I know you're braver than you think. Will you marry me?" She looked at the 6-year-old boy beside them, the first words he'd spoken in 3 years. At the tobacco-stained man smirking in the doorway. At the life she'd never thought she deserved. 3 days ago, this cowboy had bought her for 3 silver coins. But to understand how a widow's ring came a lifeline, we need to go back to the auction block where Catherine Morrison stood barefoot and bleeding. The auction barn stank of manure, desperation, and broken dreams. Catherine Morrison stood barefoot on a pine crate, her feet already bleeding from splinters embedded in the rough wood. September cold bit through the thin cotton dress they'd given her that morning. 30 men formed a semicircle around the platform, eyes traveling over her body like she was livestock at market. She kept her gaze fixed on a knot in the floorboard, 6 feet away. If she didn't look at their faces, she could almost pretend this wasn't happening. Almost. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," the auctioneer, a pot-bellied man named Silas Crow, spread his arms wide. "I present Miss Catherine Morrison, recently arrived from Denver. 26 years of age, healthy as a horse," and he paused for dramatic effect, yellowed teeth showing in a grin. "A widow, knows her place, knows her duties. Perfect for a discerning rancher who appreciates quality." A ripple of crude laughter rolled through the crowd. Catherine's jaw clenched. She'd learned over the past 3 weeks since fleeing Boston that silence was survival. Every word she spoke could be twisted, used against her, so she'd stopped speaking entirely. "Now let's start the bidding at $10. Silence. The men shuffled their feet, studied their boots. $10 was apparently too steep for a human being. Crow's jovial expression tightened. "Come now, gentlemen. That's less than you'd pay for a decent horse, and Miss Morrison here can cook, clean, mend." "Can she keep her mouth shut?" someone called out. More laughter. Catherine felt heat crawl up her neck, but she didn't move, didn't react. She'd become very good at not reacting. $5, a voice finally called. A gap-toothed rancher with tobacco-stained beard stepped forward. "5 and not a penny more." Catherine's stomach turned over. She'd learned to read men's faces to catalog the different types of danger. This one was the worst kind, the kind who enjoyed fear. "5 going once." Crow's gavel rose. "5 going twice." A movement at the wake of the barn caught her attention. A tall figure stepped through the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. She couldn't make out his features, only that he was broad-shouldered and walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was. "I'll pay what she's actually worth," the stranger said. His voice cut through the crowd like a blade through butter. "Not a dime more, not a dime less." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Crow's face reddened. "The bid is already at 5, son." "I heard you." The man moved closer, and Catherine caught her first clear look at him. Younger than most of the men here, maybe early 40s, with a weathered face that suggested a life lived outdoors. Dark hair too long touching his collar. Several days of stubble shadowing his jaw. But it was his eyes that struck her. Gray as storm clouds and completely calm. He pulled 3 silver coins from his pocket. Let them catch the lamplight. $3, Crow sputtered. "That's an insult." "That's what I paid for my first wife's headstone," the stranger said quietly. His gray eyes swept over Catherine briefly. "And no woman should ever cost less than remembering the dead." The barn went silent. Even Tobacco Beard seemed taken aback by the statement. "This is highly irregular," Crow muttered. "So is selling human beings," the stranger replied. "But here we are." Crow looked between the stranger and Tobacco Beard, clearly calculating. $3 was insulting, barely worth the effort. But $3 was real money right now, and Tobacco Beard hadn't produced any currency. "Fine," Crow said finally. $3. But you take her as is, no complaints later." "Wouldn't dream of it." The stranger crossed to Crow and dropped the coins into his palm with a soft clink that echoed in the sudden quiet. Just like that, 3 pieces of silver in Catherine's life had a new owner. She waited for him to turn to her, to examine his purchase, to assert his ownership the way she'd seen men do with livestock at market. Waited for the proprietary gleam in his eye, the hand reaching for her arm, the beginning of whatever nightmare came next. Instead, he turned and walked toward the barn door. Crow blinked. "Wait, you're not going to check your merchandise?" She can walk, can't she? The stranger paused at the door, glancing back. His eyes met Catherine's for just a moment. She couldn't read the expression there. Come on then, if you're coming. I'm not carrying you. Catherine's mind went blank. Come on then if you're coming, as if she had a choice, as if this was anything but exactly what it was, ownership purchased and paid for. But something in his tone and the way he'd already dismissed the entire transaction made her feet move before her brain caught up. She stepped down from the crate, her legs nearly buckled. She'd been standing there for over an hour before the auction even started. But she locked her knees and forced herself forward. The crowd parted wordlessly. She could feel their eyes on her, feel their judgment and curiosity and disappointed desire. The stranger was already outside. Catherine emerged into glaring sunlight, momentarily blinded. When her vision adjusted, she saw him standing beside a horse, a large roan mare with intelligent eyes checking the saddle cinch. "What's your name?" he asked without looking at her. Catherine opened her mouth, closed it. She hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, wasn't sure she could. "Never mind." He finished with the cinch and moved to a pack horse tied nearby. "You can tell me if you want to or not. Makes no difference to me." The casualness of it felt like a trap. Catherine had learned that kindness was often just cruelty wearing a patient mask. She stood motionless, waiting for instructions, for demands, for the moment when his facade would crack and reveal what he really wanted. The stranger pulled a canteen from his pack and turned to face her directly for the first time. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the exhaustion that seemed to live in his bones. He looked like a man who had seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. He held out the canteen. "You're probably thirsty." Catherine stared at the offering. Definitely a trap. Men didn't give things without expecting something in return. That was the fundamental equation she'd learned. Everything had a price, and the price was always higher than they told you. "It's just water," he said as if reading her thoughts. "I haven't poisoned it, if that's what you're worried about." She wasn't worried about poison. She was worried about debt, about the moment when he'd collect payment for even this small kindness. But her throat was dust dry, her lips cracked. She'd had nothing to drink since early morning. Slowly she reached for the canteen. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and she flinched despite herself. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But he didn't comment, just stepped back and returned to checking his supplies. Catherine lifted the canteen to her lips. The water was warm and slightly metallic, but it was the most delicious thing she'd tasted in days. She forced herself to drink slowly, to not gulp it down like the desperate creature she was. "That's far enough." A new voice, slurred and angry. Catherine's hand froze, water dribbling down her chin. 3 men had followed them out of the barn. Tobacco Beard and 2 others who looked like they'd stepped out of the same mold. Rough clothes, rougher faces, the kind of men who believed might made right. The stranger didn't turn around. "You need something, Gibbs." So Tobacco Beard had a name. Gibbs stepped closer, his 2 companions flanking him. "That girl should have been mine. You cheated somehow." "I paid what Crow asked for." The stranger's voice remained mild, but Catherine saw his hand drift to his hip where a gun belt rode low. "More than you could scrape together, apparently." $3 is an insult. She's worth more than that." "Then why didn't you pay more?" Gibbs's expression darkened. He stepped toward Catherine, and she felt her heart hammer against her ribs. But before he could reach her, the stranger moved. The transformation was instant. One moment he'd been relaxed, almost bored. The next he radiated a lethal stillness that made Catherine's breath catch. He still hadn't turned around, hadn't even looked at Gibbs directly. But somehow his entire presence had shifted into something that made the 3 men hesitate. "Walk away," the stranger said quietly. "Right now, because if you make me turn around, if you make this into something it doesn't need to be, you won't like how it ends." Catherine could see Gibbs calculating, weighing his pride against his survival instinct. The moment stretched. Then Gibbs spat in the dirt and jerked his head at his companions. "This ain't over." "It is," the stranger said. "You just don't know it yet." The 3 men retreated, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Catherine realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, her heart still hammering. The stranger went back to his supplies as if nothing had happened. "You done with that water?" Catherine lowered the canteen with trembling hands. She should give it back. should say thank you, should say something. But her voice was locked away, trapped behind 3 weeks of silence and 26 years of learning that words were weapons that could be used against you. Keep it, he said when she just stood there. You'll need it for the ride. Ride. Right. He'd bought her. Now he was taking her somewhere. To his ranch, probably. To whatever life he'd purchased her for. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then looked down at her. You can ride. Catherine shook her head. She'd never been on a horse in her life. Private carriages in Boston, yes. Horses, no. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Of course not. He dismounted again. All right, come here. This was it. The moment where he'd pull her up in front of him, where she'd feel his chest against her back, his arms around her, his breath on her neck, where the pretense of civility would end and the reality of ownership would begin. Catherine's feet wouldn't move. She knew she was being stupid. Delay wouldn't change anything. Resistance would only make it worse. But her body had decided it was done obeying, done accepting, done surrendering. The stranger waited. When she still didn't move, he sighed. The sound carried something that might have been understanding. Look, he said, and his voice had lost its edge, gone patient, in a way that made Catherine's eyes burn with unexpected tears. I know you've got every reason not to trust me. I know you think you know how this goes. But I'm asking you to walk maybe 10 feet and let me help you onto this horse. Because my ranch is 4 hours away and you're barefoot and the sun is brutal today. Can you do that? The kindness in his tone was worse than any cruelty could have been. Cruelty she knew how to handle. Kindness felt like a hand reaching through the armor she'd built, threatening to crack it open and expose all the fear and pain she'd locked away. But he was right about one thing. She was barefoot, and 4 hours walking on this rocky ground would shred her feet to ribbons. Catherine forced herself forward. 1 step, 2, 3. When she was close enough, the stranger held out his hand. I'm going to lift you up, he said. I'm going to touch your waist. That's all. All right. The fact that he was asking as if her permission mattered, as if she had any right to refuse, made something crack in Catherine's chest. She managed a small nod. His hands were warm and rough with calluses when they gripped her waist. He lifted her easily, setting her on the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her and Catherine gasped, certain she was about to fall. But the stranger's hand steadied her calf just briefly, just enough, then withdrew. Josie's gentle, he said, patting the horse's neck. She won't throw you unless you kick her, and I'm guessing you're not planning to kick her. Catherine shook her head mutely. Good. He gathered the reins and handed them to her, then adjusted the stirrups for her shorter legs. Every movement was efficient, impersonal. Then he went to the pack horse, untied it, and began leading both animals away from the barn. Wait, Catherine's mind struggled to process what was happening. He wasn't riding. He was walking, leading the horses while she sat in the saddle. That couldn't be right. Masters didn't walk while their servants rode. That wasn't how the world worked. But apparently it was how his world worked, because he just kept walking, not looking back to see if she was following. The horse moved forward naturally, following the pack horse, and Catherine found herself carried along whether she wanted to be or not. They left the small frontier town behind. It was barely a town, really. More of a collection of buildings scattered around a main street, born from nothing, and probably destined to return to nothing once the nearby silver mine played out. Catherine had never learned its name, hadn't wanted to. It was just the place where she'd been sold for 3 pieces of silver. The sun beat down mercilessly as they headed into open country. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Rolling hills covered in dry grass, occasional stands of cottonwood trees, distant mountains purple with haze. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, so vast that Catherine felt like an insect that might be crushed by all that emptiness. The stranger maintained a steady pace, never looking back. He moved like a man used to long distances, his gait eating up the miles without apparent effort. Catherine clung to the saddle horn, trying to find a rhythm with the horse's movement, trying not to think about what waited at the end of this journey. An hour passed, then another. The sun crept lower, throwing long shadows across the ground. Catherine's backside ached from the unfamiliar position. Despite the water she'd drunk, her throat was parched again. But she didn't say anything, didn't ask to stop, didn't complain. Finally, as they topped a low rise, the stranger stopped. Catherine looked past him, and saw a homestead nestled in a shallow valley. A log cabin, a barn, a small corral, all surrounded by grassland that stretched to the horizon. Home, the stranger said simply. He glanced back at her for the first time since they'd left town. You still doing all right up there? Catherine nodded, though all right was a generous description. She was exhausted, frightened, and had no idea what came next. But she was still conscious and still in the saddle, so by some definitions, she supposed that qualified as all right. They descended the rise and approached the cabin. It was larger than Catherine had expected, well-maintained with a covered porch and glass windows. Luxuries on the frontier. Behind it, the barn looked sturdy and the corral fence was intact. Whatever else he was, the stranger clearly wasn't destitute. He stopped in front of the cabin and tied the pack horse to a hitching post, then came to stand beside Josie. All right, come on down. Catherine tried to swing her leg over, but her muscles had stiffened during the ride. She managed to get her leg across, but then just sat there, unsure how to dismount without falling. I'm going to help, the stranger said, and again with that warning and that request for permission. Hands on my shoulders. Catherine hesitated, then placed her palms on his shoulders. His muscles were solid beneath her touch, warm from the sun and the long walk. He gripped her waist this time less briefly and lifted her down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground. If he hadn't kept his grip, she would have fallen. Steady, he murmured. Give it a second. Catherine stood there supported by a stranger's hands, feeling the strength return to her legs. This close, she could smell him. Leather and horse and clean sweat. Not unpleasant. Could see the individual dark hairs of his stubble, the exact gray of his eyes. Could feel his breath, steady and patient. Better, he asked. She nodded. He released her immediately and stepped back. Then unexpectedly, he knelt. Catherine jerked backward, her heart slamming into her throat. Men kneeling meant one thing: violence, punishment, humiliation. She'd seen it in Boston, seen what happened when men knelt to teach lessons to women who'd forgotten their place. Easy, the stranger said, and his voice was soft, non-threatening. I'm just checking your feet. Hold still a second. His hands moved to her left foot so gently that Catherine barely felt the touch at first. Then she realized what he was doing. He was examining her feet, which were cut and bleeding from her hours standing on the wooden crate, embedded with splinters and dust. Damn, he muttered. You should have said something. Catherine couldn't find words to explain that she hadn't said anything, because saying things never helped, only made them worse. That she'd learned to endure pain silently because screaming just entertained the people causing it. The stranger stood and moved to his saddlebag, returning with a cloth and a small bottle. This is going to sting, he warned, then poured clear liquid onto the cloth. Whiskey from the smell. He knelt again and began cleaning her feet with surprising gentleness, picking out splinters, wiping away blood. It did sting. Catherine bit her lip to stay silent, but a small sound escaped anyway. Not quite a whimper, but close. Almost done, he said quietly. You're tougher than you look, you know that. Catherine didn't feel tough. She felt like she was made of glass, held together by hope and terror, in equal measure, one sharp impact away from shattering completely. He finished with her feet and stood again studying her. Then he did something that would replay in Catherine's mind 1,000 times in the weeks to come. He shrugged off his coat, a worn leather duster dusty from travel, and draped it around her shoulders. The weight of it was immediately comforting, the lingering warmth from his body seeping into her cold skin. Catherine pulled it closer instinctively, then froze, waiting for him to tell her the cost of this kindness, to explain what she now owed. You're shivering, he said by way of explanation. Sun's going down. Gets cold fast out here. Then he turned and headed for the cabin door, as if covering a stranger in his coat was the most natural thing in the world. Catherine stood there, wrapped in leather that smelled like gun oil and pine smoke, her feet throbbing but clean her mind, struggling to reconcile everything that had happened in the past 4 hours. He'd bought her for almost nothing. He'd defended her from Gibbs without being asked. He'd walked for hours while she rode. He'd tended her wounds with his own hands. He'd knelt before her. Men didn't kneel before women they owned. They didn't ask permission. They didn't treat purchases like people. The stranger pushed open the cabin door and looked back as if surprised she hadn't followed. You coming? I've got stew from last night that'll warm up all right. And you look like you haven't eaten in a week. It had been 3 days, actually. But who was counting? Catherine took a step forward, then another. Then she stopped because she had to know. Had to hear him say it so there wouldn't be any confusion later when reality set in. What do you want from me? Her voice cracked from disuse, barely more than a whisper. The stranger tilted his head slightly, considering the question. When he answered, his voice was matter-of-fact without any hidden meanings she could detect. Tonight I want you to eat something, rest, and not bleed on my clean floor. He paused. Tomorrow we'll figure it out. But you paid for me. I paid 3 coins to get you out of that barn before Gibbs bought you. His gray eyes met hers steadily. What I want and what you're obligated to give me are 2 different things. Do you understand the distinction? Catherine didn't. Not really. In her experience, there was no distinction. What men wanted, they took, and obligations were just another word for powerlessness. The stranger seemed to read the confusion on her face. He sighed, scrubbed his hand over his jaw. Look, I'm going to say this once clearly, so there's no misunderstanding. You don't belong to me. I don't own you. That auction back there was legal theater, nothing more. As far as I'm concerned, you're a person who had a bad piece of luck and needed help. That's it. The words didn't make sense. They were in English, and Catherine understood each one individually, but strung together, they formed an impossible sentence. Why, she managed. Why what? Why would you pay for me if you don't want? She couldn't finish the sentence. To force you to repay me with your body. He said it bluntly without embarrassment. Because I'm not a man who needs to buy compliance. Because I've got 2 hands that work fine for cooking and cleaning. And because, he paused, something flashing across his face too quickly for Catherine to identify. Because once a long time ago, someone helped me when I needed it, and I figured it was past time I paid that forward. Catherine stood there in his coat, her feet hurting, her mind reeling, trying to decide if this was an elaborate lie or if she'd somehow stumbled into the one decent man in 1,000 miles of frontier brutality. You still haven't told me your name, the stranger added. I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Cole. This, he gestured at the cabin, the land around them is my place, has been for about 5 years now. Catherine, she whispered. Catherine Morrison. Catherine. He tested the name, nodded. All right, Catherine Morrison, let's get you inside and fed. Everything else can wait until you've got a full stomach and a good night's sleep. He disappeared into the cabin. Catherine stood in this growing darkness, wrapped in Ethan Cole's coat, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. She had been sold for 3 silver coins. She had been knelt before. She had been told she didn't belong to the man who'd bought her, and now she was being invited, not ordered invited, to eat dinner. Catherine Morrison, who had learned to expect nothing but cruelty from the world, who had spent 3 weeks in silence, preparing herself for the worst, who had watched the sunrise that morning, certain that this would be the day her life ended in all the ways that mattered. Catherine Morrison took a breath, pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders, and walked through the door. The interior of Ethan Cole's cabin was nothing like what Catherine had expected. Clean for one thing, genuinely clean. Not the half-hearted swipe of a rag that most bachelor establishments received. The wooden floor was swept. The windows let in the last rays of sunlight, without a film of grime obscuring them, and the air smelled of wood smoke and something herbal she couldn't quite identify. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for a single tin cup and what looked like a very old photograph in a simple frame. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat near the kitchen area, where shelves held an orderly collection of tin plates, cups, and cooking implements. In the corner, a rocking chair faced the fireplace, a quilt folded neatly over its back. 2 doors led off the main room. Bedrooms, Catherine assumed, though both were closed. Ethan was already at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. The smell hit Catherine a moment later. Meat, vegetables, something rich and savory that made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd smelled real food, the kind that was cooked with care instead of boiled into flavorless submission. Sit, Ethan said, nodding toward the table. It wasn't an order exactly, more of an observation about what made sense. This will be ready in a minute. Catherine moved to the table but didn't sit. Old habits died hard. She'd learned at the foundling home in Denver during her weeks hiding there that sitting before being explicitly told to could earn consequences. Better to stand and wait for absolute clarity. Ethan glanced over his shoulder and frowned slightly. Something wrong with the chair. I, Catherine's voice stuck. You said to sit, right? So why are you standing there looking like you're waiting for the gallows? Because I don't know the rules yet, Catherine wanted to say. Because every place has different rules and the punishment for breaking them is always worse than you expect. Because sitting without permission got Mary Sheffer locked in the basement for 2 days at the foundling home, and she came back different, broken in ways that didn't heal. But she couldn't say any of that, so she just stood there, mute and useless. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then seemed to understand something. His expression softened. Catherine, when I say sit, I mean sit. I'm not testing you. I'm not waiting for you to make a mistake so I can punish you for it. I'm just a man who's been walking for 4 hours and figures you've been riding for 4 hours and both of us could probably use a chair. That's all. The reasonableness of it was almost cruel. Catherine wanted rules she could follow, clear boundaries she could navigate. This open-ended kindness felt like walking through fog. No way to know what was solid ground and what was a cliff edge. But she sat, pulled out the chair which scraped against the floor with a sound that made her wince and lowered herself onto it. The wood was smooth, worn by years of use, and the height was perfect. She could rest her aching feet flat on the floor, could let her spine relax just slightly. Better? Ethan asked. Catherine nodded, though better was relative. She was sitting in a stranger's house, wearing his coat, about to eat his food, with no clear understanding of what any of it would cost her. Ethan ladled stew into 2 bowls, carried them to the table, then returned for spoons and a half loaf of bread that he tore into chunks. He set 1 bowl in front of Catherine, kept the other for himself, and sat down across from her without ceremony. Go ahead, he said, breaking off a piece of bread and using it to sop up some of the broth. It's better while it's hot. Catherine stared at the bowl. Carrots, potatoes, chunks of beef, all swimming in rich brown gravy. More food in this single bowl than she'd had in the past week. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. The first bite was a revelation. Flavor, actual flavor, salt and pepper, and something else, maybe thyme, flooded her mouth. The beef was tender, the vegetables cooked through but not mushy. It was the kind of meal that someone had taken time with, had cared about. She took another bite, then another. Then she forced herself to slow down, to eat like a person instead of a starving animal, because she'd learned that showing too much desperation only invited mockery or worse. Ethan ate steadily, not watching her but not pointedly ignoring her either. Just eating his own dinner like this was a normal evening, like he regularly brought home women he'd bought at auction and fed them his stew. You can eat faster if you want, he said after a minute. You're not going to offend me, and there's more in the pot if you finish that. Catherine's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. More made it yesterday. Figured I'd be eating leftovers for days. Might as well share it with someone who actually needs it. He sopped up more gravy with his bread, chewed thoughtfully. When's the last time you ate? 3 days, Catherine said, then immediately wished she'd lied. Admitting weakness was dangerous. People used weakness against you. But Ethan just nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. And before that, they fed us at the foundling home before they sent us away. Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. Breakfast, mostly porridge. Nothing on the trip here. Mr. Crow said food cost extra. Ethan's jaw tightened, the first sign of anger she'd seen from him. Crow's a bastard. He paused. Sorry, I shouldn't curse. You don't need to apologize, Catherine said, surprising herself. I've heard worse. I imagine you have. Ethan pushed the bread plate toward her. Eat as much as you want. I meant what I said. There's plenty. So Catherine ate. She ate until the bowl was empty and her stomach felt uncomfortably full, stretched beyond what it had grown accustomed to. Ethan watched her finish, then stood and ladled more stew into her bowl without asking. I can't, Catherine started. You can. Maybe not right now, but in an hour or so you'll be hungry again. That's how it works when you've been starving. Your body doesn't trust that food will keep coming, so it wants to eat everything immediately. Better to have it waiting than have you lying awake with your stomach cramping. He said it like he knew, like he'd been there himself. Catherine wanted to ask, but didn't dare. They finished the meal in silence. Catherine managed another few bites of the second bowl before her body absolutely refused more. Ethan cleared the dishes without comment, pumping water into a basin and washing them efficiently. Catherine watched, trying to figure out her place in this strange household. Should she offer to help take over the washing? Was he testing her domestic skills? I can do that, she said finally. Ethan glanced back. Do what? The washing, the cleaning, I know how. I don't doubt it. He set a clean bowl on the drying rack. But you've had a long day and those feet need proper tending before infection sets in. Dishes can wait, or I can do them. I've been doing them for 5 years. One more night won't kill me. But you paid for me. Catherine. He turned to face her, his hands dripping soapy water. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that there's got to be a ledger somewhere, a running total of what you owe me. 3 coins plus dinner plus a place to sleep equals some amounts of labor or something else. That's how it's worked everywhere you've been, right? Everything has a price, and you're always the one paying. Catherine couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. He'd articulated her exact thoughts with unnerving accuracy. Well, that's not how it works here, Ethan continued. I fed you because you were hungry. I'll give you a place to sleep because you need one. Tomorrow, if you want to help around the place, fine. If you want to rest, also fine. If you want to leave, walk out that door, and I won't stop you. There's a no ledger, Catherine. There's no debt. That's not... People don't just... She struggled to find words. Why would you help someone without expecting anything back? That's not how the world works. Ethan dried his hands on a rag, considering her question. Maybe it's not how your world has worked, but it's how my world works. And right now, you're in my world, so you get to decide if you want to accept that or keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. He crossed to one of the closed doors and opened it, revealing a small bedroom. A narrow bed with a real mattress, a wooden chest, a window with actual curtains. Nothing fancy but clean and private, and more luxury than Catherine had known in months. This was... Ethan paused, something passing across his face. This is the spare room. You can sleep here. Door has a lock on the inside. See? He demonstrated, showing her the simple bolt lock. I'm in the other room. I sleep heavy and the walls are thick, so you don't need to worry about disturbing me or anything else. Catherine understood what he wasn't saying. The walls were thick enough that if she screamed, he wouldn't hear. But also the walls were thick enough that she could lock herself in without fearing he'd break through. There's a nightshirt in the chest, Ethan added. Clean, probably too big for you, but it'll do until we can get you proper clothes. And I'll bring some water and clean rags so you can wash up if you want. He left, giving her space to process. Catherine stepped into the room slowly, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. But it remained solid. The bed was real. The mattress yielded when she pressed her hand against it. The curtains moved in the slight breeze from the cracked window. A room, a private room with a door that locked. For her. Ethan returned with a basin of warm water, clean rags, and a small jar. This is salve, he said, setting everything on the chest. For your feet. Should help with the cuts and keep infection out. You know how to dress a wound? Catherine nodded. She'd learned at the foundling home where injuries were common and sympathy was not. Good. He moved to leave, then paused in the doorway. Catherine, I want to say something, and I need you to really hear it. You're safe here. I know you don't believe that yet, and I know I can't convince you just by saying it, but it's true. You're safe. Whatever happened to you before, whatever you're afraid might happen now, it won't. Not here, not while I'm breathing. Before Catherine could respond, he pulled the door closed behind him. She heard his footsteps retreat, heard the other bedroom door open and close, then silence. Catherine stood frozen in the center of the small room. She waited for the door to open again, for Ethan to come back with the real demands, the actual cost of his generosity. She waited for 10 minutes, 20, half an hour. The door didn't open. Finally, moving like someone in a dream, Catherine walked to the door and slid the bolt lock home. The metal clicking into place was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. She peeled off Ethan's coat reluctantly because it had become a kind of armor and hung it on the peg beside the door. Then she opened the chest and found the nightshirt just as he'd promised. It was clean and worn soft from many washings, smelling faintly of soap and sunshine. Catherine undressed, slowly folding the filthy dress she'd been wearing for 3 weeks into a small square. She should probably burn it, she thought distantly. Burn it and everything it represented. The foundling home, the auction, the feeling of being looked at like livestock. She used the warm water and rags to wash, wincing, as she scrubbed away days of grime and fierce sweat. The water in the basin turned gray, then brown. When she was as clean as she could manage, she applied the salve to her feet like Ethan had instructed. It stung at first, then went cool and soothing. The nightshirt swallowed her. It hung to her knees and the sleeves went past her hands, but it was clean and soft. And when she pulled it on, she felt almost human again. Almost. Catherine approached the bed like it might bite her. She'd slept on mattresses before, but never one this nice. Never one in a private room with a locked door. She sat on the edge, first testing it. The mattress compressed under her weight, cradling her aching body. She could lie down, she realized. Could actually stretch out instead of curling into a protective ball in whatever corner seemed safest. She lay back, and the exhaustion she'd been fighting for weeks crashed over her like a wave. Her eyes burned with tears she'd been too afraid to shed earlier. She was safe, Ethan had said. She was safe. Catherine wanted to believe him. Wanted it so desperately that the wanting itself felt dangerous, like setting herself up for the worst betrayal yet. But the door was locked. The room was warm. Her stomach was full. And for tonight, just for tonight, maybe she could let herself pretend that safety was possible. She closed her eyes. Sleep came fast, but not peacefully. She dreamed of the auction barn, of Gibbs's gap-toothed leer of hands reaching for her that she couldn't escape. She dreamed of the foundling home, of the women who whispered that she'd never survive alone, of the brutal efficiency with which they'd processed human lives. She dreamed of Boston, of her father's cold calculation when he'd told her she would marry Marcus Ashford, of Marcus's eyes when he'd looked at her across the dinner table like she was a prize already won, of the bruises she'd seen on his first wife's arms, the hollow emptiness in the woman's eyes before she'd thrown herself from a balcony. Catherine woke gasping, disoriented, her heart racing. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting the unfamiliar room in silver and shadow. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, only that she was trapped, that danger was coming, that she needed to run. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw the locked door, the chest Ethan's coat hanging on the peg. Memory returned, though it felt unreal. Had she really been bought today? Had a stranger really brought her here and asked for nothing? Catherine sat up, pressing her palms against her eyes. Her mouth was dry, and her head ached, probably from crying in her sleep, though she didn't remember doing it. She needed water. She slipped out of bed, her feet protesting the movement despite the salve. She unlocked the door as quietly as possible and eased it open. The main room was dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace. She could make out the shape of the table, the chairs, the shelves. The water pump was in the kitchen area. Catherine crept toward it, trying not to make noise, trying not to wake Ethan. But the floorboards betrayed her, creaking under her weight. "Can't sleep." Catherine nearly jumped out of her skin. Ethan's voice came from the rocking chair by the fireplace. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out his silhouette. He was sitting there, fully dressed, though his boots were off. "I'm sorry," Catherine whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Didn't. I wasn't sleeping." He stood, and Catherine instinctively took a step back, but he just moved to the table and struck a match, lighting an oil lamp. Warm light flooded the room. "You need water." "I didn't mean to disturb you." "Catherine, it's fine. You're allowed to need water." He filled a cup from the pump and brought it to her. "Bad dreams." She nodded, accepting the cup and drinking deeply. The water was cool and clean. Nothing like the tepid, slightly brackish stuff at the foundling home. "Not surprising," Ethan said. "You've been through hell. Dreams are how your mind tries to make sense of it. They'll get better eventually." "Do you—" Catherine stopped, but Ethan gestured for her to continue. "Do you have bad dreams? Is that why you weren't sleeping?" Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or shared understanding. "Sometimes. Had a few years of bad dreams after I came back from the war. They fade mostly, but every now and then—" "War, After the war between the states ended, I joined the army anyway. Was barely 17, lied about my age because I was an idiot kid who thought war was adventure. Learned different pretty quick." "How long?" 3 years in uniform, Little Bighorn aftermath, wounded knee. Different war, same hell. Saw more death than any person should have to see in 10 lifetime. He paused, staring at something Catherine couldn't see. Lost a lot of good men. Well, lost a lot. The pain in his voice was so raw that Catherine wanted to reach out to offer comfort the way he'd offered it to her. But she didn't know how, didn't know if it would be welcome. Is that why you helped me? She asked instead. Because of the Wallace partly. Ethan moved to the fireplace, adding a log to the dying embers. The wood caught quickly, sending up sparks. During the war, I saw what happens when people are treated like they're less than human. Saw what men are capable of when they stop seeing others as worthy of basic dignity. And after the war, when I was trying to figure out who I was if I wasn't a soldier anymore, someone gave me a chance I didn't deserve. Helped me when they had no reason to. He shrugged. So when I saw you standing on that platform today, looking like you'd already given up on the world, figured I'd give you the same chance someone gave me. What happened to them? The person who helped you. Ethan's expression closed off, became unreadable. She died 3 years ago. Cholera outbreak that swept through Denver. Catherine filed that away, understanding now why there was a spare bedroom, why the cabin felt like a place where a woman had once lived, why Ethan knew how to cook and clean and tend wounds with gentle hands. I'm sorry, Catherine said softly. Me too. Ethan turned from the fire, his face half shadowed. Her name was Margaret. We weren't married, though we probably would have been if she'd lived. She was the one who taught me that kindness isn't weakness, that helping someone doesn't make you a fool, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is put someone else's needs ahead of your own. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with shared grief. Catherine grieved for people she'd never known, for the girl she might have been if the world had been kinder. Ethan grieved for a woman named Margaret who taught him how to be human again. You should try to sleep more, Ethan said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Alarms spiked through Catherine. Why, what happens tomorrow? Nothing bad, just life, chores. Maybe we'll go check the fence line, see how the cattle are doing, normal things. He must have seen the fear on her face because he added, Catherine, when I say long day, I mean long in the sense of there being things to do, not long in the sense of anything terrible. You're going to have to start trusting that I mean what I say. I'm trying, Catherine whispered. I just don't know how. I know, but here's the thing about trust. It's built in small pieces. You don't have to trust me completely right now. You just have to trust me enough to go back to bed and lock your door and believe that when you wake up, you'll still be safe. Can you do that? Could she? Catherine wasn't sure, but Ethan was looking at her with such patient understanding, waiting for her to find her own answer rather than telling her what it should be, that she found herself nodding. Good. Go on then. I'll be out here a while longer, so if you need anything, just call. Catherine returned to the small bedroom, locked the door again, and climbed back into bed. This time with her thirst quenched and Ethan's quiet presence just beyond the wall, sleep came more easily. And when the bad dreams tried to surface, she pushed them back with the memory of a man kneeling before her. Not to hurt, but to help. Not to take, but to give. Not all men were monsters, she thought as sleep claimed her. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan Cole was proof of that. Morning came with sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee. Catherine woke slowly, disoriented again by the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed. For a moment she thought she was back in Boston, that the past 2 years had been a nightmare. Then she saw Ethan's coat on the peg and remembered. She'd been sold. She'd been saved. She was in a stranger's cabin in Montana territory with no clear idea of what came next. But alive. Safe, maybe. She dressed in yesterday's filthy dress because it was all she had, then steeled herself and opened the door. Ethan was at the stove frying eggs and bacon. The domestic normalcy of it was jarring. He glanced up when she emerged. Morning. Coffee's on the table, cups in the cupboard. Catherine poured herself coffee, cradling the warm cup in both hands. She'd had coffee maybe a dozen times in her life. It was expensive, and the foundling home had considered it an unnecessary luxury. This coffee was strong and slightly bitter, but after she added cream from the pitcher on the table, it became something rich and fortifying. Ethan brought breakfast to the table. Eggs, bacon, toast with butter. Another meal that was better than anything Catherine had eaten in recent memory. They ate in companionable silence. Catherine found herself relaxing incrementally. If Ethan was planning to reveal himself as a monster, he was taking his sweet time about it. So, Ethan said, pushing his empty plate aside, we should talk about what happens next. There it was. Catherine's stomach clenched despite the good breakfast. Here came the demands, the expectations, the real cost of his charity. You need clothes, Ethan continued. Real clothes, not that. He gestured at her dress. Whatever that thing used to be before Crow got his hands on you. There's a trading post about an hour's ride from here. We can go there, get you outfitted proper. I don't have any money, Catherine said quietly. Didn't ask if you did. Ethan stood, started clearing dishes. Do you need clothes? Yes. Do I have money to buy clothes? I suppose. Then we're going to get you clothes. That's not charity, Catherine. That's just practical. Can't have you walking around in rags. He moved to the door, paused. While we're there, we'll pick up some other supplies. Maybe talk to some people, see if there's work around that might suit you, if you decide you want work. Catherine's mind struggled to process. Work? You said you know how to cook and clean and mend. There's always folks looking for help with that kind of thing. If you want to earn your own money, have your own independence, I can help you find opportunities. He shrugged. Or if you'd rather stay here and help around the ranch for a while until you figure out what you want, that's fine too. What do you want? When was the last time anyone had asked her that? What do you want me to do? Catherine asked carefully. Doesn't matter what I want. What do you want to do? I don't know, Catherine admitted. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Well, that's a shame, but we can fix it. You've got time to figure it out. No rush. Ethan grabbed his hat from the peg. In the meantime, we get you some clothes so you don't have to wear mine, though. He smiled slightly. I'll admit the nightshirt looked less ridiculous on you than it does on me. The casual humor caught Catherine off guard. She almost smiled back, stopped herself just in time. Smiling felt dangerous, like showing vulnerability that could be exploited. An hour later, they were on the trail again. This time, Ethan had saddled a different horse, a smaller mare named Bess, for Catherine to ride. He rode alongside her on Josie, maintaining an easy pace that let them talk. How long have you had the ranch? Catherine asked, surprising herself with the question. 5 years, like I said. Bought it with my army pay and what Margaret left me. Started with nothing but the cabin and 20 head of cattle. Built it up slow, steady. Got about 100 head now. Some horses, chickens. It's not a grand operation, but it's mine. Do you run it alone? Mostly. Sometimes I hire help during roundup or when I need to move the herd, but day to day it's just me. I like it that way. Peaceful. Peaceful. Catherine tried to imagine what that would feel like. To wake up each day knowing you were safe, that you controlled your own life, that peace was possible. It seemed like a fantasy, something from a storybook that had nothing to do with real life. But maybe a small voice whispered in her mind, maybe it could be real. The trading post turned out to be a larger establishment than Catherine expected, serving the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. Inside, shelves groaned under the weight of goods. Fabric, tools, food stores, everything a frontier household might need. The proprietor, a weathered woman named Ruth, greeted Ethan warmly. Haven't seen you in a month, Cole. Thought maybe you'd finally starved to death out there. Not yet, Ruth. Too stubborn to die. Ethan gestured to Catherine. This is Catherine Morrison. She needs clothes, everything. Work clothes, night clothes, boots, the whole outfit. Ruth's shrewd eyes assessed Catherine in one sweeping glance, taking in the ill-fitting dress, the bruises that were just beginning to fade, the way Catherine held herself like she expected to be struck. Her expression softened. Come with me, honey. Ruth said, her voice gentle. Let's see what we can find. What followed was the strangest hour of Catherine's life. Ruth pulled out fabric and ready-made garments, measuring Catherine with quick efficiency, asking questions about preferences that Catherine had no idea how to answer, because nobody had ever cared about her preferences before. Ethan stayed in the main part of the store, giving them privacy, occasionally calling out suggestions that Ruth either accepted or dismissed with cheerful authority. He's one of the good ones, Ruth said quietly as she pinned a skirt to fit Catherine's waist. Yeah, Ethan, I mean. Known him since he came out here after the war. Lost as a man could be back then, but Margaret helped him find his way. After she passed, figured he'd give up and drift away. But he didn't. Stayed, worked hard, made himself into someone she'd be proud of. Did you know her, Margaret? Oh yes, she was special, that one. Had a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Looks like Ethan learned that from her. Ruth met Catherine's eyes in the mirror. I don't know your story, honey, and I won't pry. But whatever brought you to Ethan's door, I hope you'll give him a chance. He's not like other men out here. He's something better. By the time they finished, Catherine had two work dresses, a nicer dress for occasions that required it, a nightgown, undergarments, a coat, and sturdy boots. More clothes than she'd owned in her entire life. Ethan paid without question or complaint, then added supplies for the ranch without asking if Ruth thought he needed them. As they loaded the packages onto the pack horse, Ruth pulled Catherine aside one more time. You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you come see me. Ethan's good people, but sometimes a girl needs another woman to talk to. Remember that. Catherine nodded, overwhelmed by the cascade of kindness from people who had no reason to care whether she lived or died. They were halfway back to the ranch when Ethan spoke again. There's something I need to tell you. About tomorrow. Catherine's hands tightened on the reins. Here it came. The real demands. There's a man named Silas Gibbs. You met him yesterday, sort of. Tobacco-stained, beard, mean eyes. I remember. He owns the Triple G Ranch north of mine, biggest spread in the territory. He's been trying to buy my land for 3 years. I keep refusing. Gibbs doesn't take rejection well. Ethan paused. I mention this because he saw you yesterday, and men like Gibbs, they don't forget things that catch their interest. You think he'll come back? I know he will. Question is when and how. Ethan glanced at her. I won't lie to you, Catherine. Having you at the ranch might make things more complicated with Gibbs. He'll see it as leverage, another angle to work. If you'd rather I take you somewhere else, somewhere safer, I understand. Catherine thought about that, about running again, about always being one step ahead of whoever was chasing her, about never having a place to stand and fight. No, she said, I'm tired of running. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Pride, maybe? Or relief? All right then, we'll deal with Gibbs together when the time comes. But the time came sooner than either of them expected. They arrived back at the ranch to find a man waiting on the porch. Not Gibbs himself, but someone who carried the same air of casual menace. Tall, well-dressed, with a tin star pinned to his vest. Sheriff. Cole, the man said, standing as they approached. We need to talk. Ethan dismounted, helped Catherine down. Sheriff Burnett, what brings you all the way out here? Got a complaint filed this morning from Mr. Gibbs. Burnett's eyes flicked to Catherine, then back to Ethan. Says you acquired a mail-order bride through an intermediary yesterday, but the contract ain't completed. No marriage certificate, no legal transfer of arrangement. Far as the law's concerned, she's still property of the original agreement. Catherine felt ice flood her veins. Property of the original agreement. She'd thought she was free, thought Ethan's 3 coins had bought her liberty. But apparently freedom required more than money. That's horseshit, and you know it, Ethan said, his voice hard. Maybe, but Gibbs is offering to assume the contract. Pay you back your cons, take the lady off your hands. Says he's got the legal right since you ain't followed through on the marriage requirement. I'm not livestock to be transferred, Catherine said, stepping forward. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Burnett looked at her with something that might have been sympathy even. Ma'am, with respect, you ain't much else without a husband to claim you. Single woman out here, you need a man's name for protection. That's just how it is. She's got mine, Ethan said. In writing, silence. Burnett sighed. Didn't think so. Look, Cole, I ain't happy about this either. But the law's the law. You got 48 hours to make it legal. Marriage certificate filed at the county office. Otherwise, Gibbs's claim takes precedence. He tipped his hat. I'll see myself out. After Burnett left, Catherine and Ethan stood in the yard, the weight of the ultimatum settling between them. You don't have to marry me, Catherine said quickly. I can leave, find work somewhere else. We're doing what Gibbs will follow. Men like him don't lose gracefully. Why do you even care? You don't know me. I know enough. Ethan's gray eyes met hers. I know you flinch when men move too fast. I know you haven't slept more than 3 hours any night since you got here. I know you're running from something, and whatever it is, it's bad enough that you'd rather stand on an auction block than go back. He paused. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking if you'll trust me long enough to keep you safe. And if I say yes, what do you get out of it? Ethan looked toward the barn where Catherine could just make out a small figure watching them from the shadows. A child. She glimpsed him yesterday hiding behind the water trough. Dark hair, maybe 6 years old, eyes too old for his face. Someone who might teach my son it's safe to speak again, Ethan said quietly. Catherine's breath caught. Your son, Thomas, he's 6. He was there when Margaret died. Saw her run into the burning quarantine tent, saw her not come out. He hasn't spoken since. Ethan's voice was rough with old pain. Doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. He just chose silence. Sometimes silence is the only safe place left, Catherine said softly. That's what I told him. But I need him to know that the world isn't all fire and death, that there are still people worth trusting. Ethan turned back to her. I think you could show him that. Someone who survived hell and came out the other side still trying. Catherine looked at the barn at the small boy watching them. She thought about her own childhood, about the years before her mother died, when she'd still believed the world could be kind, about what it might have meant to have someone show her that kindness existed even in the darkest times. 48 hours, she said. 48 hours, Ethan confirmed. Then we go to the county office and sign papers. Legal binding, but he hesitated. Catherine, I meant what I said last night. You don't owe me anything. This marriage would be protection, nothing more, unless you wanted it to be something else. But that would be your choice, not my expectation. Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak, because the truth was she didn't know what she wanted. Safety, yes. But beyond that, she'd spent so long running, she'd forgotten how to imagine a future that involved staying. That night, Catherine lay awake in her locked room, staring at the ring Ethan had wordlessly left on her dresser. Margaret's ring. A simple gold band worn smooth by years of love. In 48 hours, she'd wear a dead woman's ring and speak vows she'd never meant to speak again. But she couldn't know that miles away in the territorial capital, a telegram was being sent. A private detective had matched her photograph to a missing persons bulletin. And the man who'd hired him, the man Catherine had been running from for 2 years, was already on a train west. Because Marcus Ashford didn't just want her back. He wanted her buried. The morning of the deadline dawned cold and clear. Catherine, dressed in the pale blue dress Ruth had helped her choose, the nicest thing she'd worn in years. Her hands shook as she tried to pin up her hair. A soft knock on the door. Catherine, can I come in? She opened it to find Ethan in his only suit. It smelled like cedar storage, carefully preserved. His hair was slicked back, stubble shaved clean. He looked younger without it and more vulnerable somehow. Your collar's crooked, Catherine said. Ethan reached up instinctively, then stopped. I can never get it right. Margaret used to. He trailed off. May I? He nodded. Catherine stepped closer, close enough to smell the soap he'd used to see the pulse beating in his throat. Her fingers brushed his neck as she adjusted the collar. He went very still, like he was afraid any movement might scare her away. There, she said softly. Better. Catherine. His voice was rough. You don't have to do this. Even now, we can find another way. There is no other way. Not with Gibbs pushing. She stepped back, smoothed her dress. Besides, you need someone to help with Thomas. And I need... She couldn't finish the sentence. What did she need? Safety, purpose, a place to stand and stop running. All of those things and more. We should go, Ethan said. Ruth and Sarah are meeting us at the county office, as witnesses. The ride to town was quiet. Thomas rode in front of Ethan, small body tense, not making a sound. The boy had watched Catherine all morning with those two old eyes assessing, judging. She tried to smile at him once. He just stared back, then retreated to the barn. The county office smelled of old paper and dusty bureaucracy, a different kind of desperation than the auction barn's manure and broken dreams. But Catherine still stood before men who would decide her fate. Only this time she'd chosen to be here. The justice of the peace, a bored-looking man named Peterson, had clearly performed this ceremony too many times to care about the particulars. Names: Ethan Cole and Catherine Morrison. Previous marriages: widower, Ethan said. Widow, Catherine lied. The word tasted like ash. Peterson scribbled notes. Witnesses: Ruth and Sarah stepped forward. Ruth gave Catherine's hand a quick squeeze. Sarah, barely 18 and full of romantic notions, looked like she might cry from the emotion of it all. All right then, let's get this done. I've got 3 more today. But before Peterson could begin, the door opened. Catherine's heart stopped. Silas Gibbs stood in the doorway, a smile on his tobacco-stained lips. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. You are Ethan said flatly, and get out. Now, I've got a legal interest in these proceedings. Want to make sure everything's on the up and up. Gibbs sauntered closer eyes on Catherine. After all, the lady and I had an arrangement through Crow. Don't seem right you just swooping in and stealing her. There was no arrangement, Catherine said, forcing her voice steady. I was sold at auction. Mr. Cole won the auction. That's all. That's so, because I've got paperwork here says different. Gibbs pulled a document from his coat. Original contract between Crow and the Denver Foundling Home. Says any woman sent west becomes legal ward of the man who pays the arrangement fee. And see here, the arrangement fee was $10. Cole only paid $3. So technically, the contract ain't fulfilled. Peterson frowned, examining the document. This appears legitimate. It's a fraud, Ethan said. Crow accepted my bid. That makes it legal. Unless the underlying contract supersedes the auction, Gibbs said smoothly. Which it does. Sorry, Cole, but the lady's coming with me. Unless you want to pay the difference, $7 to make it right. $7. A pittance for most men, but Catherine could see from Ethan's face that $7 might as well be 70. He'd spent what cash he had on her clothes yesterday. The ranch was barely profitable. He didn't have $7 to spare. I'll pay it, Ruth said suddenly. She pulled coins from her pocket, counted them out on Peterson's adequate. There, $7. Now the contract's fulfilled and you can get the hell out of here, Gibbs. Gibbs's smile never wavered. That's real sweet, Mrs. McKinney. But the contract specifies payment from the acquiring party. Cole, not some meddling shopkeeper. That's enough, Ethan said. His hand had drifted to his hip where his gun would normally rest. But of course he'd left it outside. No weapons in the county office. Catherine, do you want to marry me? Yes, she said with a hesitation, and then we're getting married. Gibbs, you can take your fake contract and shove it. It ain't fake and you know it. Gibbs's voice hardened. Sheriff Burnett, you going to enforce the law or do I need to file a complaint? Catherine had been so focused on Gibbs that she hadn't noticed Burnett standing in the corner. The sheriff looked deeply uncomfortable, but he stepped forward. Cole, I can't let you proceed until this is sorted out. If the contract's legitimate, it's not, Ethan said. Then you'll need to prove that, which means a hearing of judge lawyers could take weeks, months. Burnett actually looked sympathetic. I'm sorry. The trap was perfect. Gibbs had maneuvered them into a legal quagmire that would drag on long enough for him to make other moves, and there was nothing Ethan could do about it without breaking the law himself. Catherine felt the walls closing in. This was it. The moment when everything fell apart, when she'd have to run again, when safety would slip through her fingers like water. But then a voice spoke up, small, rusty from disuse, barely more than a whisper. My mama's ring. Everyone turned. Thomas stood by the door clutching Ethan's hand. His eyes were fixed on Catherine's bare finger. Thomas, Ethan's voice cracked. You spoke. She needs Mama's ring for the wedding. Thomas looked up at his father with those two old eyes. You said no woman should cost less than remembering the dead. She needs the ring or it doesn't count. It was the most words the boy had spoken in 3 years, and every single one landed like a hammer blow. Ethan knelt down to Thomas's level hands shaking. You're right. You're absolutely right. He pulled Margaret's ring from his pocket, the one he'd given Catherine 2 nights ago, and she'd returned that morning unsure if it was hers to keep. He stood turned to Catherine, took her hand. This ring was my first wife's, Margaret. She was the best person I ever knew. When she died, I thought I'd never love anyone again, never trust anyone again. But then I saw you standing on that auction block, and I saw someone who needed saving. And maybe I needed saving too. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. Catherine Morrison. I don't know your whole story. I don't know what you're running from or what demons chase you at night. But I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you think. And I know that if you'll have me, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that strength. This is highly irregular, Peterson sputtered. Shut up, Ruth said. Let the man finish. Ethan slipped the ring onto Catherine's finger. It fit perfectly. Will you marry me not because the law says you have to, not because Gibbs is a bastard, but because I'm asking, because I want to, because Thomas needs you, because I need you? Catherine looked at the ring, at Ethan, and Thomas, who was watching with such desperate hope that it hurt to see, at Gibbs, whose smug smile had faltered, at Ruth and Sarah, who were crying openly now. And she thought about running, about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, never staying long enough to build anything real, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion. Yes, she said, I'll marry you. You can't, Gibbs started forward. The contract doesn't mean shit compared to free choice, Ethan said. Catherine's choosing me. End of discussion. Sheriff, are you going to allow this? Burnett looked at Gibbs, then at the couple in front of him, at the small boy who'd just spoken for the first time in years, at Ruth with her shotgun's sharp glare. And he made a choice. I don't see any crime being committed here. Two adults want to get married, that's their right. Your contract dispute can be settled in civil court, Gibbs. But for now, I suggest you leave and let the justice do his job. Gibbs's face went purple with rage. This isn't over, Cole. Not by a long shot. Never thought it was, Ethan said calmly. But for now, get out of my wedding. Gibbs left, but his parting look at Catherine was full of dark promise. She shivered despite the warm room. Peterson, flustered and wanting this over with, rushed through the ceremony. Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman? I do. Do you, Catherine Morrison, take this man? I do. Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I pronounce you married. Sign here, witnesses sign there, and we're done. Catherine's hands shook as she signed her new name. Catherine Morrison Cole. A stranger's name. But maybe eventually it could become hers. The kiss was brief chase, just lips touching lips. But when Ethan pulled back, Catherine saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not possession, not triumph, just quiet gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing to stay. Outside the county office, Ruth hugged Catherine so hard her ribs protested. You did good, honey, real good. Sarah was still crying. That was the most romantic thing I've ever seen. When Thomas spoke, I thought my heart would burst. Thomas himself was clinging to Ethan's leg, as if speaking had used up all his courage, and he needed to retreat back into silence. But when Catherine knelt down to his level, he looked at her directly for the first time. Thank you, she said softly, for helping me, for speaking up. Thomas studied her face for a long moment. Then hesitantly, he reached out and touched the ring on her finger. Just a brief tap, like he was testing if it was real. Then he retreated behind Ethan again, but not before Catherine saw the ghost of a smile on his small face. They rode back to the ranch as a family, legally, officially a family. It felt surreal. Yesterday, Catherine had been property on an auction block. Today, she was Mrs. Catherine Cole, wife of Ethan Cole's stepmother to Thomas. She'd gone from having no one to having a husband and son in the space of 48 hours. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that might have been hope. But hope died that evening when the banker arrived at the ranch. Catherine was in the kitchen attempting to make dinner under Ethan's patient instruction when she heard the horse approach. Ethan went to the door, Thomas trailing behind him. Mr. Henderson, this is unexpected. Henderson, a portly man with nervous eyes, dismounted. Cole, I wish this was a social call, but it ain't. I've got news about your mortgage. Catherine's hands stilled on the knife she'd been using to cut vegetables. What about it? Ethan's voice had gone flat. Gibbs bought it this morning. Bought it from the bank in Helena and had it transferred to his name, which means he's now your lender, and Henderson pulled papers from his coat. He's calling in the full balloon payment. $800 due in 30 days. Catherine heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath. $800. It might as well be $8,000. Most ranchers worked on credit, paying mortgages over years. Calling in the full amount was legal, but it was also a death sentence for most operations. That's 3 months early, Ethan said. Clause says payment can be accelerated if the lender has concerns about asset security. Gibbs says your ranch is falling into disrepair. And honestly, Cole, he ain't wrong. You've been letting things slide. Because he'd been grieving, Catherine thought. Because he'd been raising a traumatized child alone. Because he'd been doing the work of 2 people by himself. I've been keeping up with payments, Ethan said. But can you make the full balloon? Because if not, Henderson looked genuinely sorry. Gibbs is offering to buy the note at a discount, cut you out entirely. You'd lose the ranch, but at least you wouldn't be in debt. Get off my land, Ethan said quietly. Cole, I'm just the messenger. I know, and I'm telling you to leave, now. After Henderson rode away, Ethan stood on the porch for a long time staring at nothing. Catherine watched him through the window, saw the defeat in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. She thought about the ledgers she'd glimpsed in his bedroom the night before left open on the desk. The careful accounting, the slim margins, the reality of frontier ranching, where one bad season could ruin you. $800. Ethan probably had $200 at most, maybe less. And it was her fault. If he hadn't bought her clothes, hadn't spent money on supplies for her, he'd have more. If Gibbs wasn't using her as leverage, this wouldn't be happening. Catherine set down the knife and walked outside. Thomas had disappeared, probably to the barn, where he went when things got scary. It's because of me, she said. Gibbs is doing this because of me. Gibbs is doing this because he's a bastard, Ethan corrected. This isn't on you. But if I weren't here, then I'd still be alone, Thomas would still be silent, and Gibbs would still want my land. He'd just be using a different lever. Ethan turned to face her. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. What will you do? I don't know. Sell some cattle, maybe. Try to scrape together what I can. He laughed bitterly. Won't be enough. Not in 30 days. But I have to try on. Catherine's mind was already racing, calculating numbers the way her father had taught her. Cattle prices operating cost the economics of frontier ranching. She'd absorbed it all during her childhood, sitting in her father's study, while he worked soaking up financial knowledge like a sponge. There had to be a solution, some angle Gibbs hadn't considered, some loophole in the contracts. Can I see the mortgage papers? She asked. Ethan looked at her strangely. Why, I might notice something. A mistake, maybe. He shrugged and went inside, returning with the documents Henderson had left. Catherine took them to the porch where the light was better and began reading. Her eyes scanned the dense legal language, the terms and conditions, the acceleration clause. And there, buried in the middle of page 3, she saw it. A discrepancy so small most people would miss it. But Catherine had spent years studying her father's contracts, looking for the tricks and traps he'd used to ensnare desperate men. Ethan, she said slowly, this clause here, about asset security concerns, it requires the lender to provide documented evidence of diminished property value. So did Gibbs provide documentation? An appraisal, a survey, anything official? Henderson didn't mention it. Then the acceleration isn't valid. Oh, not legally. He can't just claim concerns. He has to prove them. Catherine's heart was beating faster now, the thrill of finding a weakness in the enemy's armor. If he doesn't have documentation, you can challenge the call in court. Delay it maybe long enough to find other options. Ethan stared at her. How do you know that? Catherine froze. She'd said too much, revealed too much. A shopkeeper's daughter wouldn't know contract law, wouldn't be able to parse legal documents with this kind of precision. She scrambled for an explanation. I just read it. Right there, it says documented evidence. Catherine. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. How do you really know this? She could lie, should lie. Maintaining her cover as a simple widow was the only thing keeping her safe. But Ethan had been honest with her, had married her, protected her, asked for nothing in return. He deserved the truth, even if the truth put them both in danger. My father is Harrison Morrison, she said quietly, of Morrison and Sons Banking, Boston. Ethan's eyes widened. The Morrison, the one who financed the Transcontinental Railroad. Yes, I was his only child, his asset, to be married to Marcus Ashford's steel magnate, to merge our empires. Catherine's hands were shaking. Marcus was a monster. He hurt his first wife so badly she threw herself from a balcony. Everyone knew, no one cared because he was rich and powerful. When Father told me I'd marry Marcus, I said no. He said I didn't have a choice. She took a breath. So I faked my death. Train derailment outside Philadelphia 2 years ago. 30 people died in that crash. I bribed a clerk to list me among the dead, disappeared into the wreckage. I've been Catherine Morrison widow ever since. Ethan was very still. And if they find you, Marcus will kill me, make it look like suicide like his first wife, another unstable woman. And father will let him because dead, I'm a tragedy he can mourn publicly. Alive and disobedient, I'm a liability. Then they won't find you, Ethan said. You don't know these men. They have resources, connections, private detectives. I know men who think power makes them gods. Fought a war against them. Ethan stepped closer. They bleed same as anyone else. Catherine wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that out here in Montana territory she could hide forever. But men like her father and Marcus didn't give up. They hunted. And eventually they always found their prey. I shouldn't have told you, she said. I've put you in danger. You've given me a weapon. Knowledge is power, right? That's what men like your father believe. Well, now I know, and knowing means we can plan. Plan for what? For when they come, because they will come, Catherine. But this time you won't be alone. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. Married, exposed, trapped between Gibbs's financial attack and the distant but approaching threat of her past catching up. She should run, should disappear in the night, take one of Ethan's horse, and ride until she hit the Pacific. It's what she'd done before, what she was good at. But the thought of leaving Thomas, of abandoning Ethan to face Gibbs alone made her chest tight, and that terrified her more than anything, because it meant she'd started to care, started to hope, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a life here. A soft knock on her door. Catherine, you awake? She opened it to find Ethan standing there fully dressed despite the late hour. Can't sleep either, he said. Thought maybe we could talk, figure out a plan. They sat at the kitchen table, the oil lamp casting long shadows. Ethan had brought the ranch ledgers and Catherine examined them with the practiced eye of someone who'd been raised in boardrooms. You're calculating feed costs wrong, she said after a few minutes. You're using last year's prices, but hay went up 14% after the drought. How did you? Ethan stopped, shook his head. Right, banking family. And you're not accounting for the calves born in spring. That's 16 more head to feed through winter. At current rates, you need an extra $120 minimum. So 800 becomes 920. That helps. Ethan's voice was dry. I'm just saying you need to know the real numbers. Hope won't save you, but accurate accounting might help you find solutions you're missing. Catherine kept reading her mind, cataloging information, calculating possibilities. And then she saw it. A series of entries from 3 years ago, right after Margaret died. Payments to a lawyer in Helena. Legal fees for... You filed a water rights claim, she said. Yeah. Margaret convinced me to do it before she died. Said the river running through the property was valuable, that I should stake official claim before someone else did. But it got tangled up in territorial bureaucracy. Never went through. Where's the claim now? No idea. Probably lost in some courthouse file. Catherine's mind was racing. Water rights in Montana territory were worth a fortune. If Ethan's claim could be validated, the ranch's value would triple. He could use it as collateral, borrow against it, maybe even force Gibbs to back down. But validating a claim required navigating territorial law, finding the right paperwork, pressing the right officials. It required someone who understood bureaucracy and legal systems. Someone like Catherine. I can find it, she said. The claim. I know how these systems work. I've watched my father manipulate them my entire life. She looked up at Ethan. Give me a week in Helena. Let me dig through courthouse records, find your claim, get it processed. If I can prove you own the water rights, Gibbs loses his leverage. Helena's 2 days' ride from here. You'd be alone, exposed. I've been alone for 2 years. I know how to be invisible. But if someone recognizes you, then I run, like I always have. Catherine reached across the table, placed her hand over his. The touch still felt strange, foreign, but less frightening than it had days ago. Ethan, let me help. You've done everything for me. Let me do this one thing for you. Ethan looked at their joined hands, then at her face. You're not doing this for me. You're doing it because you need to prove to yourself that you're not helpless, that you can fight back. Catherine blinked. He'd seen right through her. Is that so wrong to... No, it's human. He squeezed her hand gently. but you don't have to prove anything to me. You're already the bravest person I know." "I'm terrified," Catherine admitted. "That's what makes it bravery." They sat in the lamplight, hands touching, planning. For the first time since fleeing Boston, Catherine felt like she was moving towards something, instead of just running away. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But what neither of them knew was that 200 miles east in the territorial capital, a well-dressed man had just checked into the best hotel in Helena. He carried himself with the easy confidence of wealth and showed the desk clerk a photograph of a young woman. "Have you seen this woman? She may be using an assumed name. There's a $500 reward for information leading to her location." The detective had found Catherine's trail, and in a territory where $500 was a year's wages for most people, it wouldn't take long for someone to sell her out. The hunt was on, and Catherine had just volunteered to walk directly into the hunter's sights. Catherine never made it to Helena. The decision to stay came 3 days after the wedding when she found Thomas hiding in the barn, clutching something to his chest. She'd been feeding the chickens, had heard a small sound like a wounded animal. When she followed it, she discovered the boy curled in the hay, tears streaming silently down his face. In his hands, he held a photograph. Margaret, young and smiling, standing beside Ethan in his Union uniform. "Thomas," Catherine approached slowly the way Ethan had taught her. No sudden movements, no demands, just presence. The boy looked up at her, those two old eyes swimming with grief. "I'm forgetting her voice," he whispered. "Mama's voice. I try to remember, but it gets quieter every day." Catherine's heart cracked open. She knew that pain, had felt it when her own mother died, when the memories started to fade like old photographs left too long in the sun. She sat down in the hay beside him, not touching, just close. "Tell me about her." She sang, all the time. Even when she was wild, she sang. Thomas's small fingers traced Margaret's face in the photograph. "And she smelled like lavender soap. And she never got angry even when I was bad." "You were never bad," Catherine said softly. "I was. I am. That's why she left." "Oh, Thomas." Catherine couldn't help it anymore. She pulled the boy into her arms, and for the first time he didn't resist. He just collapsed against her, sobbing. "Your mama didn't leave because of you. She left because she was brave. Because she ran into fire to save people who needed her. That's not your fault. That's who she was." Thomas cried until he had no tears left. And when he finally pulled back, he looked at Catherine with something new in his eyes. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of trust. "You smell like lavender, too," he said. "Ruth gave me the same soap. Said every woman out here uses it because it's all the trading post stocks." Catherine brushed hair from his forehead. "But Thomas, you don't have to forget your mama to make room for me. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just trying to be here if you need me." "Papa needs you," Thomas said. "He pretends he doesn't, but he does. He's scared all the time now. I can tell." "Scared of what?" "Losing us. You and me. That's why he doesn't sleep." Thomas wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "That's why he sits in the rocking chair at night. Mama's chair. He's keeping watch." Catherine thought about Ethan's exhaustion, the shadows under his eyes, the way he startled at unexpected sounds. He was a man waiting for disaster, convinced it was inevitable. "Then we'll just have to show him he doesn't have to be scared anymore," Catherine said. "Think you can help me with that?" Thomas nodded. "I can try." That night, Catherine didn't go to Helena. She stayed at the ranch, and she and Thomas made dinner together while Ethan worked on repairing fence posts. The boy chattered while they cooked, his voice still rusty, but growing stronger with each sentence. He told her about the chickens, about which ones were mean and which ones laid the best eggs, about how Josie the horse liked to steal apples from the barrel, about the time he and his mama had found a nest of baby rabbits and raised them until they were big enough to release. When Ethan came in for dinner, he stopped in the doorway staring. His son was talking, really talking, and Catherine was laughing at something Thomas said, her face lit with genuine joy. "What did I miss?" Ethan asked. "Thomas was telling me about the great chicken rebellion of last summer," Catherine said. "They pecked Mr. Henderson when he came to visit," Thomas said, grinning. "All of them at once. He ran away screaming." Ethan's lips twitched. That was pretty funny. They ate dinner together, the three of them, and for the first time since Margaret died, the cabin felt like a home instead of a mausoleum. Catherine watched Ethan, watching Thomas, saw the wonder and relief and bone-deep gratitude on his face. After Thomas went to bed, Ethan found Catherine on the porch. "Thank you," he said simply, "for whatever you did today." He hasn't talked like that in 3 years. "I didn't do anything. I just listened. That's everything." Ethan leaned against the porch rail beside her. "I've been so focused on trying to fix him, I forgot that maybe he just needed someone who understood what it felt like to lose everything." "Is that what you think I did, lost everything? Didn't you, your family, your name, your whole life? You burned it all and walked away." Catherine considered that. "I didn't lose everything. I escaped with my life. That's more than some people get." They stood in comfortable silence watching the stars emerge. The night air carried the scent of dry grass and distant pine smoke. Somewhere out in the darkness, cattle lowed, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. "I'm not going to Helena," Catherine said. Ethan turned to look at her. "Why not?" "Because Thomas needs me here. You need me here. And frankly, I need to be here." She met his eyes. "I've spent 2 years running. I'm tired. I want to stand and fight." "Gibbs won't make it easy." "I don't expect easy. I expect hard and ugly and possibly violent, but at least it'll be honest." Catherine smiled slightly. "Besides, I have other ideas about how to handle the mortgage problem. Ideas that don't require me to leave. Such as, we're going to audit Gibbs's books." Ethan blinked. "What?" "Men like Gibbs don't get rich through honest work. They cheat, cut corners. And somewhere in his operation there's evidence. We find it, we expose him, and suddenly he has bigger problems than harassing you." "That's insane. That's strategic." Catherine's mind was already racing, planning. "I'll need help. Ruth maybe, Sarah, people in town who Gibbs has wronged. We build a case quietly, then we strike all at once." Ethan studied her face in the starlight. "You're not just a banker's daughter, are you? You're a banker yourself. At least you would have been if you'd been born male." "I sat in my father's office from the time I was 6 years old. Watched him destroy men with paperwork and clauses buried in contracts. Watched him build an empire on other people's desperation." Catherine's voice hardened. "I know every trick, every trap, and I know how to dismantle them." "Then let's dismantle Gibbs." They started the next morning. Catherine rode to the trading post under the guise of shopping, but really she was there to talk to Ruth. "I need information," Catherine said once they were alone in the back room, "about Gibbs, his operation, his employees, anyone who might have grudges." Ruth's eyes sharpened. "What are you planning?" "To destroy him before he destroys us." Ruth smiled, the expression fierce. "About damn time someone took that bastard down. Where do you want me to start?" Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine built her case. She interviewed former employees who Gibbs had cheated. She examined property records at the county office, finding irregularities in his land claims. She talked to ranchers who'd sold to Gibbs under suspicious circumstances, discovering patterns of coercion and fraud. And she found what she was looking for. Gibbs had been stealing water rights from his neighbors, filing false claims, bribing officials. The evidence was scattered across a dozen different sources, but Catherine pulled it together like a spider weaving a web. But while Catherine was hunting Gibbs, Gibbs was hunting her. The confrontation came on a Thursday afternoon. Catherine was riding back from town alone. Ethan had wanted to come, but she'd insisted she could handle a simple trip to the trading post. She was a mile from the ranch when 3 riders cut her off. Gibbs sat on the largest horse, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd been hired for their capacity for violence, rather than their ranching skills. "Mrs. Cole," Gibbs said, his voice oily, "we need to have a conversation." Catherine's hand moved toward the rifle in her saddle holster, but one of Gibbs's men was faster. He had his gun drawn and pointed at her before she could react. "I wouldn't," Gibbs said. "We're just going to talk, unless you make this difficult." "What do you want?" "I want to know what you've been doing, asking questions, digging through records, making people nervous." Gibbs urged his horse closer. "See, I've got friends in the county office. They tell me you've been very interested in water rights claims." "My water rights claims." Catherine forced her voice steady. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. You're Harrison Morrison's daughter. I had a detective look into you after the wedding. Wanted to know who I was dealing with." Gibbs smiled. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered Catherine Morrison died 2 years ago in a train accident. Except here you are alive and well and married to my neighbor. Ice flooded Catherine's veins. He knew. He knew everything. Now here's what's going to happen, Gibbs continued. You're going to give me everything you've collected. Every document, every interview, every scrap of paper. And then you're going to convince your husband to sign over his ranch, quietly, peacefully. And if I don't, then I send a telegram to Marcus Ashford in Boston. Tell him exactly where his runaway bride is hiding. From what I understand, he's been looking for you quite desperately. Gibbs leaned forward in his saddle. I'm sure he'd be very grateful. Might even pay a reward. Catherine's mind raced. This was checkmate. If she refused, Marcus would come. If she complied, Ethan lost everything. Either way, Gibbs won, unless she changed the game entirely. I'll give you the documents, she said, but I need 3 days to collect everything. It's scattered across multiple locations. Gibbs studied her, suspicious. 2 days. And if you try to run, I send that telegram immediately. I won't run. You have my word. The word of a woman who faked her own death. Forgive me if I'm skeptical. Gibbs gestured to his men. But fine, 2 days. My men will be watching the ranch. Don't try anything stupid. They rode off, leaving Catherine shaking in her saddle. She made it back to the ranch on pure momentum, her mind already working through possibilities, calculating odds, looking for the angle that would save them. Ethan was in the barn when she arrived. She told him everything. Watched his face go hard when she described the threat, the ultimatum. We fight, Ethan said simply. Fight how? He's got men, guns, legal claims, and now he's got leverage with Marcus. We can't win this straight. Then we don't fight straight. Ethan's gray eyes were cold. We fight dirty. That night they planned. Catherine spread her documents across the kitchen table, showing Ethan what she'd found. The pattern of fraud, the stolen water rights, the bribed officials. This is enough to ruin him, she said, but only if we can get it to the territorial marshal before Gibbs realizes what we're doing. And with his men watching the ranch. We need a distraction, Ethan said. Something big enough to pull his attention away. Such as me. Thomas's small voice came from the doorway. He was supposed to be asleep, but apparently he had been listening. I could be the distraction. Absolutely not, Ethan said immediately. Why not? Mr. Gibbs wants the ranch. If he thinks he can get it by taking me, he'll do it. And while he's focused on me, Mama can get the documents to the marshal. Catherine's heart caught at the word, Mama. Thomas had called her Mama without hesitation, without even seeming to realize he'd done it. It's too dangerous, Catherine said, though her mind was already seeing the logic of it. You're a child. I'm the son of a Union soldier and a nurse who ran into fire to save people. I'm braver than I look. Thomas lifted his chin. And I'm tired of being scared. Tired of hiding. Mama Margaret wouldn't hide. She'd fight. Ethan and Catherine exchanged looks. The plan was insane, dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it might be the only way to save everything they'd built. We'd need backup, Ethan said slowly. Ruth, Deputy Morrison, people we can trust. I can get them, Catherine said. But Ethan, if we do this, if we use Thomas's bait, we have to be absolutely certain we can protect him. I won't let anything happen to him. I swear it. Ethan knelt in front of his son. Thomas, you understand what you're volunteering for. Gibbs might hurt you, might scare you. It won't be like your nightmares. It'll be worse because it'll be real. I know, Thomas said. But you taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done anyway. Right? Ethan pulled Thomas into a fierce hug. You're your mother's son, both of them. The plan went into motion the next day. Catherine rode to town, openly making sure Gibbs's watchers saw her. She went to the trading post where Ruth was waiting. Tomorrow, Catherine said quietly while pretending to examine fabric. Dawn. Gibbs will make his move on Thomas. When he does, I need you to get these documents to Deputy Morrison. He rides to Helena, immediately gets them to the territorial marshal. And if Gibbs realizes what we're doing, then Ethan and I buy time however we can. Catherine met Ruth's eyes. If this goes wrong, if I don't make it, promise me you'll take care of Thomas. Nothing's going wrong. We've planned this too carefully. But Ruth's hand shook slightly as she took the envelope containing Catherine's evidence. They both knew how fragile this plan was. How many things could go wrong? Catherine returned to the ranch as the sun was setting. Gibbs's men were still watching from the ridge, making no attempt to hide. Good. Let them see her return. Let them think she was complying with the deadline. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, thinking about everything that could go wrong tomorrow. About Thomas in danger. About Ethan facing down Gibbs. About her past finally catching up in the form of Marcus Ashford's hired guns. A soft knock. Ethan standing in her doorway. "Can I come in?" She nodded. He sat on the edge of her bed, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, she could see the fear in his face. The terror of a father about to put his child in danger. "Tell me this is the right thing," he said quietly. "Tell me I'm not making the worst mistake of my life." "I can't tell you that. I don't know." Catherine took his hand, squeezed it. "But I know we're out of options. I know Gibbs won't stop. And I know that if we don't fight now, we'll spend the rest of our lives running." "I'm terrified," Ethan admitted, his voice broke. "I'm terrified that if I let myself love again, I'll lose you too. And this time it'll destroy what's left of me and my son. I've already lost everything once. I can't survive it again." Catherine pulled him closer, wrapped her arms around him. "You won't lose us. We're going to win this. Together." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've been running for so long, I don't know how to stay. What if I'm not brave enough? What if I fail you the way I failed everyone else?" Catherine's own fear confession tumbled out. "But I'm choosing to believe anyway, choosing to fight anyway, and that has to count for something." Ethan lifted his head, looked at her with such raw vulnerability that it hurt. "I love you. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I do. I love you, Catherine Morrison Cole." "I love you too," she whispered, and realized with shock that it was true. Somewhere between the auction block and this moment, she'd fallen in love with the broken cowboy who'd bought her for 3 coins and never once treated her like property. They kissed. Not the chaste brush of lips at their wedding, but something desperate and claiming and full of promises they both hoped they'd live to keep. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know. These past few weeks, having you here, watching you bring Thomas back to life, being part of a family again, it's been worth everything. We're going to make it through this," Catherine said fiercely. "And then we're going to have a real wedding, not a legal transaction, a celebration." "I like that." They spent the night together, not making love, but just holding each other, drawing strength from proximity. Two broken people who'd found something worth fighting for in each other. Dawn came too fast. Thomas ate breakfast with the solemnity of a soldier preparing for battle. He'd insisted on wearing his best clothes, said he wanted to look brave. Catherine's heart broke watching him, the small boy with too much courage. "Remember the plan," Ethan said, checking his rifle for the third time. "You go to the barn like normal, to feed the chickens. When Gibbs's men grab you, don't fight. Don't run. Just let them take you." "And you'll be following?" Thomas asked. "Every step. I won't let you out of my sight." "What about Mama?" Catherine knelt beside him. "I'll be riding to town to get help. But Thomas, you are the bravest person I know. Your Mama Margaret would be so proud." "Both my mamas," Thomas corrected. Then he hugged her tight. "Be careful. You too, little one." They separated to their assigned positions. Thomas walked to the barn with forced casualness. Ethan disappeared into the tree line with his rifle. Catherine saddled Bess and prepared to ride out. The watchers on the ridge noticed her movement immediately. One of them broke off, clearly planning to follow. Good. Let them think she was running scared. Thomas had just entered the barn when it happened. Two of Gibbs's men rushed in after him. Catherine heard Thomas's startled cry, fought the urge to run to him. "Stick to the plan. Trust Ethan." She mounted Bess and rode hard for town. Behind her she heard shouting, the sound of horses. Gibbs's remaining watcher was following her, just as they had anticipated. Catherine led him on a chase, making it look like panic flight rather than calculated strategy. She headed toward town, but at the last moment veered off toward Ruth's trading post. The man following her didn't expect the turn. By the time he corrected, Catherine had already dismounted and run inside. Ruth was waiting with her shotgun. "He follow you. Right on schedule." The man burst through the door, gun drawn, and found himself facing Ruth's loaded shotgun. "Drop it," Ruth said calmly, "or I'll redecorate my walls with your insides." He dropped it. Good. Now sit down and shut up. You move, you die. Catherine was already moving to the back room where Deputy Frank Morrison waited with his brother. The documents. Got them. Already sent my brother writing to Helena an hour ago. He'll reach the marshal by tonight. Frank stood, checked his gun. Now let's go save that boy. Meanwhile, at an abandoned line shack 5 miles from Ethan's ranch, Gibbs waited with Thomas. The boy sat on a wooden chair, hands tied, face pale but composed. He hadn't cried, hadn't begged. Just sat there with that unsettling calm that made Gibbs nervous. "Where's your father?" Gibbs demanded. "He should be here by now." "He's probably planning how to kill you," Thomas said matter-of-factly. "He's good at that. He was a soldier, won lots of battles." "Shut up. Mama says men who tell children to shut up are cowards. Both my mamas. They both said that." One of Gibbs's men laughed quickly, stifled it when Gibbs glared. The door burst open. Ethan stood there, rifle raised. "Let my son go." "Or what, you'll shoot me in front of the bar." Gibbs pulled his own gun, pressed it to Thomas's head. "I don't think so. You're right, I won't shoot you." Ethan lowered the rifle. "But she will." Catherine stepped through the back window, Ethan's pistol aimed at Gibbs's head. She'd circled around while Gibbs was focused on the front door. "Step away from the child, now." Gibbs's eyes widened. "You're supposed to be running to town." "I was. Then I turned around. Funny how that works." Catherine's hand was steady, her voice cold. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down the gun and untie Thomas. Then you're going to explain to Deputy Morrison, who's standing right outside, why you kidnapped a 6-year-old child." "You're bluffing. Try me." The standoff lasted 5 seconds that felt like hours. Then Gibbs made his choice. He swung his gun toward Catherine. Ethan's rifle cracked. The bullet hit Gibbs's shoulder, spinning him around. His gun clattered to the floor. Gibbs's men reached for their weapons. The door burst open. Frank Morrison stood there with 3 other deputies, all with guns drawn. "Everybody freeze." It was over in moments. Gibbs and his men disarmed, arrested, Thomas freed. The boy ran to Catherine, threw his arms around her waist, and just held on shaking. "You came back," he whispered. "I thought maybe you'd run." "Never." Catherine knelt, cupped his face in her hands. "I told you I was staying. I meant it." Ethan joined them, pulled them both into his arms. The 3 of them stood there in the dusty line shack, holding each other, alive and whole and together. "Is it over?" Thomas asked. "Not quite," Frank said, "but it will be. Gibbs is going to jail for kidnapping, fraud, extortion. The documents Mrs. Cole gathered, they're being reviewed by the territorial marshal right now. My guess, Gibbs will be lucky if he doesn't hang." "And his claim on the ranch?" Ethan asked. "Void, based on fraudulent premises. Judge will throw it out once he sees the evidence." Frank smiled. "You're clear, Cole. All of you." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Thomas sat in front of Ethan, Catherine beside them on Bess. They'd survived. Against all odds, they'd won. But the victory felt fragile, because Catherine knew that somewhere Marcus Ashford was still looking for her, still hunting, and eventually he'd find her trail. The thought lasted right up until they arrived home to find a well-dressed stranger waiting on their porch. Catherine's blood turned to ice. This was it. Marcus had found her. But the man smiled, held up empty hands. "Mrs. Cole, I'm Harold Pinkerton, private investigator. I've been hired to find you." "By Marcus Ashford," Catherine said flatly. "Initially, yes, but circumstances have changed." Pinkerton pulled an envelope from his coat. 3 days ago, Marcus Ashford was arrested by federal marshals in Boston. Seems someone sent them detailed evidence of stock manipulation, bribery, and fraud. Evidence compiled by someone with intimate knowledge of his business practices. Catherine's heart was pounding. "Who?" "A lawyer in Philadelphia, working on behalf of Harrison Morrison." Pinkerton's smile widened. "Your father, Mrs. Cole. Apparently he's had a change of heart about your arranged marriage. Marcus's arrest freed him to act against his former business partner. And once the arrest started, well, Marcus had bigger problems than chasing runaway brides." "I don't understand." "Your father wants to meet with you. Sent me to arrange it if you're willing. He's dying, Mrs. Cole. Cancer. Has maybe 6 months. And he wants to apologize before it's too late." Catherine couldn't process it. Her father, the man who tried to sell her to a monster, was asking for forgiveness. She doesn't have to see him, Ethan said, moving protectively closer. Whatever he wants, he doesn't get to demand anything from her arm. I know. Pinkerton looked at Catherine. But he asked me to tell you something. He said, I thought power was worth any price, but I was wrong. And I'm sorry I made you pay for my mistake. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't enough. A deathbed apology couldn't erase years of being treated like property. But it was something. An acknowledgement, a crack in the armor of the man who'd terrified her childhood. Tell him I'll think about it, she said finally. Pinkerton nodded, tipped his hat. I'll be at the Helena Hotel for another week. Send word if you decide. He mounted his horse, then paused. For what it's worth, Mrs. Cole, you did the right thing. Running. Building this life. Some cages are worth breaking, no matter the bottom. After he left, Catherine stood on the porch trembling. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders. You all right? I don't know everything I thought I knew about my father, about why he did what he did. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he did care in his own terrible way. Doesn't matter if he cared. What matters is what you want. Ethan turned her to face him. Do you want to see him? Catherine thought about it. About the girl she'd been in Boston, powerless and afraid. About the woman she'd become here, strong enough to face down armed men and build a life from nothing. No, she said. That girl is dead. I killed her when I got on that train 2 years ago. My father wants to apologize to someone who doesn't exist anymore. You sure? I'm sure. Catherine leaned into Ethan's embrace. My family is here now. You and Thomas, Ruth and Sarah and Frank. This ranch, this life. I'm not going back, not even to say goodbye. Then we won't. Ethan kissed her forehead. We'll stay right here and build something better than either of us had before. That night they had the real wedding Catherine had wanted. Nothing fancy, just family and friends gathered in the ranch house. Ruth officiated, having gotten herself ordained through a mail-order church specifically for this purpose. Thomas carried the rings, Margaret's gold band, and a new silver one Ethan had commissioned from the town blacksmith. Sarah was Catherine's bridesmaid, crying happy tears through the entire ceremony. Frank and his brother stood as witnesses. The vows were different this time. Not the perfunctory legal words, but promises forged in fire and tested by trial. I, Ethan Cole, take you, Catherine Morrison Cole, not because the law says I must, but because my heart says I cannot do otherwise. Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. You've taught me that love isn't a liability. It's the only thing worth protecting. I promise to fight for you, with you, and beside you for every day we have. Catherine's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I, Catherine Morrison Cole, take you, Ethan Cole, as proof that second chances exist. You've shown me that home isn't a place. It's the people who see you at your worst and choose you anyway. I promise to stay, to build, and to love you more fiercely than I've ever run from anything. Thomas stepped forward, unprompted. And I promise to talk a lot, so you never forget what you're missing when I'm quiet. Laughter rippled through the small gathering. Ethan and Catherine exchanged rings, kissed with the kind of joy that comes from surviving hell together. Afterward, there was food and music and dancing. Sarah played fiddle while her brothers provided accompaniment on guitar and harmonica. Catherine danced with Ethan, with Thomas, with Frank and Ruth, and every friend who'd helped them survive. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Catherine found herself on the porch with Ethan and Thomas, watching the stars emerge. Think we'll ever get bored? Catherine asked. Quiet ranch life. With you, never. Ethan pulled her close. Besides, something tells me quiet isn't in our future. He was right. 3 months later, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The child, a daughter they named Margaret Catherine, was born the following spring. 2 years after that, a son they called Harrison, after Catherine's father, who died never having reconciled with his daughter, but leaving her his entire fortune in penance. The money changed everything. Ethan expanded the ranch, hired workers, built a proper house to replace the cabin. But they kept the cabin standing, turned it into a guest house for travelers, and a reminder of where they'd started. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying Sarah Tanner in a ceremony that had Ruth weeping with joy. They had 4 children, all of whom called Catherine Grandma Cat and Ethan Grandpa Cole. The ranch prospered. Catherine's business acumen, combined with Ethan's ranching knowledge, created an operation that became a model for the territory. They were the first ranch to hire women as ranch hands, to pay fair wages, to treat employees like family rather than labor. And through it all, they never forgot where they'd started. The auction barn that had stank of manure and broken dreams was torn down in 1895, replaced by a school where children learned their dreams mattered, that they were worth more than any price. The trading post expanded under Ruth's leadership, becoming a hub for the growing community. But that was all still to come. The story truly ends 32 years later in 1919. A young soldier still limping from wounds suffered at Below Wood rode into the Montana ranch on a borrowed horse. He'd been sent by a friend in Helena, told that an old cowboy here might have wisdom for a man trying to figure out who he was after war. The ranch was thriving, 2,000 acres now, with cattle grazing as far as the eye could see. A large house, barns, outbuildings, workers' quarters. The original cabin stood at the center of it all, preserved like a shrine. An old man sat on the porch of the main house rocking slowly. He was 85, white-haired, weathered, like old leather, but his gray eyes were still sharp as broken glass. "You the soldier?" the old man asked. "Yes, sir. Ethan Cole." "That's me. Come to hear a story, did you?" "Yes, sir, if you've got one to tell." Ethan Cole smiled. "Oh, I've got one. About how the West wasn't won by gunslingers or gold rushers. It was won by women brave enough to burn their old lives and men broken enough to kneel." The door opened, and an old woman emerged, silver hair pinned in a neat bun, wearing a simple dress. She moved with the grace of someone who'd never forgotten how to be strong. "Ethan, are you telling that story again?" She had a trace of Boston in her accent, softened by decades of Western living. "The boy wants to hear it, Catherine." Catherine Cole studied the young soldier with eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. "It's not just a story, son. It's a promise that no matter how dark things get, no matter how broken you feel, you can still build something beautiful. You just have to find the courage to try on. And to accept help when it's offered," Ethan added. "And to forgive yourself for the past," Catherine continued, "and to believe you deserve a future." They moved as one mind, these two old people who'd clearly spent a lifetime finishing each other's sentences. The soldier watched transfected as they settled into chairs side by side. "Let me tell you about the day I bought my wife for 3 silver coins," Ethan began. The story took hours. The soldier listened, riveted, as Ethan and Catherine traded the narrative back and forth. The auction, the ranch, Gibbs Thomas's silence and eventual speech, the desperate plan, the final confrontation. By the time they finished, the sun was setting again, painting the ranch in gold. "And you just stayed?" the soldier asked. "Built all this one choice at a time," Catherine said. "One day deciding to trust instead of run. One moment choosing to fight instead of flee." A man in his late 30s emerged from the barn, followed by a gaggle of children. Thomas, now gray at the temples, but still with that too-old wisdom in his eyes. His children and grandchildren swarmed the porch. "Grandpa, Grandma, dinner's ready." The youngest, a girl of maybe 3, climbed into Catherine's lap. "Grandma, tell the story. The one about when you were sold for 3 coins. Again, you've heard it a dozen times, but it's the best story. You're like a princess who saved herself." The soldier cleared his throat. "Is that how you tell it, that you saved yourself?" Catherine and Ethan exchanged a look. 32 years of love compressed into a single glance. "We saved each other," Catherine said. "That's the truth of it. He gave me a place to stand and fight. I gave him a reason to open his heart again. And together we built this." She gestured at the ranch, the family, the life they'd created, from nothing but 3 silver coins and the audacity to hope. The soldier stayed for dinner, watched the family interact with the easy comfort of people who genuinely loved each other. 3 generations around one table, talking and laughing and living. As he prepared to leave, he found Ethan and Catherine on the porch again, the spot they apparently claimed each evening. "Thank you," he said, "for the story." "It's not just a story, son," Catherine reminded him gently. "It's a promise that you can survive anything, that you can build something worth surviving for." The soldier rode away as darkness fell. He'd visit that ranch many times over the years, watch it continue to grow and thrive. Watch Ethan and Catherine grow old together, with the grace of 2 people who'd earned every wrinkle, every gray hair, every moment of peace. Ethan died in 1923, age 88, in the rocking chair he'd built for Margaret 40 years earlier. Catherine held his hand just as he'd held hers through countless trials. "Still no regrets," he whispered in his final moments. "Only one," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face, "that I didn't find you sooner. We found each other when we needed to. That's what matters." Ethan's eyes still gray as storm clouds focused on her face. "I love you, Catherine Morrison Cole. Best $3 I ever spent. Best choice I ever made." He smiled, closed his eyes, and was gone. Catherine followed 6 months later, age 63. The doctor said her heart simply gave out, but those who knew her understood. She'd decided it was time. They were buried on the ranch under the cottonwood tree Ethan had planted the year they married. The headstone read, "Ethan Cole and Catherine Morrison Cole, united by 3 silver coins. Bound by love, earned not bought, together always." And beneath in smaller letters, the West wasn't won by guns. It was won by people brave enough to choose love over fear. Thomas ran the ranch for another 20 years, training his grandson in the same lessons his stepmother had taught him. Numbers, strategy, compassion, strength. The 3 silver coins remained in a shadow box in the cabin, a museum piece now, curiosity for tourists. But for those who knew the story, really knew it, those coins were never currency. They were a question: what is a human life worth? And an answer: more than can ever be bought. But everything when freely given. The ranch still stands. The story still gets told. And somewhere on that porch, if you listen carefully on quiet evenings, you can almost hear 2 voices. An old cowboy and a runaway heiress telling their grandchildren about the day the world changed for 3 silver coins. And teaching, always teaching, that the price of redemption isn't measured in money. It's measured in the courage to stay when every instinct says run. The strength to trust when trust has only ever brought pain. The audacity to build when destruction seems inevitable. 3 silver coins bought a transaction. But love, real love, the kind forged in fire and tested by trial, that's priceless. And it's always, always worth fighting for.